The geopolitics of inflation and debt is a complex interplay between economic forces and political power, shaping the stability and influence of nations in the global arena. At its core, this dynamic revolves around how rising prices and mounting debt burdens affect countries differently, depending on their economic strength, monetary policies, and geopolitical positioning. Inflation and debt are not just economic issues, they are deeply political, influencing everything from domestic stability to international alliances and conflicts. Inflation, the sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services, erodes purchasing power and can destabilize societies. But its geopolitical impact varies. For wealthy, economically resilient nations, like the US or those in the Eurozone, moderate inflation can sometimes be managed with monetary policy, such as interest rate hikes. However, for developing or highly indebted countries, inflation can spiral out of control, leading to currency collapses, social unrest, and even political upheaval. When inflation surges in these nations, it often forces them to seek external help, whether through IMF bailouts or loans from major powers like China or the US, which then gain leverage over their policies and alliances. Debt, on the other hand, is a double-edged sword in geopolitics. Sovereign debt allows governments to fund infrastructure, military expansion, or social programs, but excessive borrowing can lead to dependency or vulnerability. Countries like Greece during the Eurozone crisis or Argentina in its repeated debt defaults have seen their sovereignty constrained by creditors. Meanwhile, China's Belt and Road Initiative has turned debt into a geopolitical tool. By lending vast sums to developing nations, Beijing gains strategic influence, sometimes securing access to ports, minerals, or political support in international forums. When debtor nations struggle to repay, they may be forced to make concessions, from resource rights to diplomatic alignments. The US dollar's dominance adds another layer. Because many global debts are dollar-denominated, when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, it strengthens the dollar, making repayment harder for foreign borrowers. This dollar squeeze can trigger crises in emerging markets, as seen in the 1980s Latin American debt crisis or more recently in countries like Turkey and Zambia. In response, some nations, like Russia and China, are trying to de-dollarize, trading in local currencies or hoarding gold to reduce vulnerability to US monetary policy. This shift could eventually weaken American financial hegemony, reshaping global power structures. Meanwhile, inflation and debt are also weapons in economic warfare. Sanctions, like those on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, aim to induce inflation and debt crises to pressure regimes. But targeted nations adapt, finding alternative trade routes, currencies, or lenders, as Russia did with China and India. These maneuvers create new geopolitical alignments, as secondary powers exploit financial disruptions to build parallel economic systems outside Western control. Ultimately, the geopolitics of inflation and debt is a high-stakes game where economic resilience translates into political power. Nations that manage these forces well retain autonomy and influence, those that fail become pawns in other strategies. As global inflation remains volatile and debt levels soar post-pandemic, these dynamics will only grow more pronounced, determining which nations rise, which fall, and who gets to write the rules of the next world order.